You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Rockies. This is Sarah Jane Maroney, your host, and welcome to the first full week in May of 2025. First up, HB 251312 has passed its final Senate vote and is on its way to Jared Polis's desk. After 17,000 comments and 700 people testified, the final version does not include the family court and out-of-state recognition provisions that had the early backlash from various outlets nationwide. However, Section 4 still remains intact, and this remains intact, allowing schools to recognize student-chosen names without informing parents, as long as this rule applies to all students. There were 4 potential amendments that were trying to meet parents halfway, and all of them failed. The final vote on Tuesday in the Senate was 23-12, all Republicans and 2 Democrats, Senator Kyle Mullica and Senator Mark Schneider, voting no. The leader, Paul Lundeen, said it was an affront to families and parental rights and described the public response as the most constituent engaged issue he had seen in his 11 years at the Capitol. We're waiting to see if Governor Polis will sign this bill. As a result of Amendment H, a Northeast Colorado judge, Judge Heinlein, has resigned, and this means that on the end of Wednesday, he was admitting to allegations that he used his position to aid a friend in court. The rulemaking committee, which Amendment H created, is currently crafting emergency rules under the assumption that the constitutional change repealed all of the existing disciplinary rules. I mentioned this last week, and so it's still very unclear. However, in this particular case, a judge has resigned. Sindai happened on Wednesday, and House Bill 1169 died with the end of the legislative session. 1169 was affectionately named YIGBY. This is Yes in God's Backyard, which would have overridden the zoning laws for churches that had extra property in which they could place housing. And this is a huge statewide concern where local officials are saying that statewide imposed zoning policies are an affront to local control and violate the Constitution of that are granted to home-ruled cities. The sponsor of the bill said it was a great first outing and that they'll bring it back again. A bit closer to home in El Paso County, District 49's school board voted on Thursday evening to ban student athletes from participating in sports teams that differ from the gender that they were assigned at birth. The resolution passed by a vote of 3-2, and this bans biological males from competing on female sports teams and biological females from competing on male sports teams. The discussion first began earlier in March, which we covered, and is in response to several executive orders that were set forth by President Trump. Another bill that has made it through both chambers, HB 251321, is awaiting Governor Polis's signature. This is a Democratic-sponsored bill that sets aside $4 million for the Colorado Defense Fund. And this money actually doesn't go to the AG, it goes to the governor's office. There have been questions asked about why this would go to the governor's office. However, it is to be used at discretion. Protecting Colorado's interests would likely go beyond the work of the AG's office and the broader legal needs, including money spent for criminal defense of state officers and employees, if necessary. Governor Polis is expected to sign this bill. This legislative session saw 48 fewer bills introduced than last year. And among the last actions for the Senate was a final vote on a proposal for House Bill 1291. This is about the rideshare companies, and it made audiovisual recordings optional. So it seems that Uber will live another day in Colorado. The Senate also tackled various gubernatorial nominations to the state's Judicial Discipline Commission, with only Jim Carpenter, a longtime Democrat political operative, being approved and the other candidates' nominations failing. And the governor, by law, cannot reappoint a nominee once the Senate has rejected that nomination. And in the House, the final bill that was debated was 1309, which codifies gender transition treatments in the statute and prohibits health plans from denying or limiting medically necessary services. Top Democrats held an end-of-session press conference with Governor Polis. The House Majority Leader, Monica Duran, said, "Democrats stand up for workers, and we stand up for unions too," end quote, which was apparently a nod to Senate Bill 5. However, Governor Polis indicated on Thursday that he plans to reject this measure. If he does sign it and it is enacted, it would repeal an 80-year-old law about unions that can begin to negotiate over-imposing dues on non-union members. However, as stated, it looks like Governor Polis will not be signing that. And even though the legislative session has ended, don't worry, because Speaker McCluskey spoke of the potential for a special session later in the year on Medicaid. She said that federal cuts, quote, potentially loom ahead, end quote. And they were fearful of what the Trump administration is doing to cut services. And there's a potential for a special session on Medicaid. Republican lawmakers held their own conference and said that unfortunately their Democratic colleagues had shredded their intent to save Coloradans money. Of the things that they mentioned and noted, one victory was SB 39 that allows nuclear to be added to the state's list of clean energy solutions. You'll recall we've done an interview with Matt Solomon about energy in Colorado. Please make sure to check that out. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit upheld Tabor and said in a finding of 7-2 decision that the collection of local governments had no right to challenge the 1992 constitutional amendment, and they have upheld the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Republican lawmakers also mentioned the budget shortfall. And although the gap was closed, all of the members of the JBC indicate that further cuts are headed for the 2026 legislative session. We did a fascinating interview with Senator Kirkmeyer. Make sure to catch that. And finally, SB 3 passed through and was signed by Governor Polis, and the Republican caucus have reached out to Trump's DOJ. And those are the top stories for the first full week in May. Thanks for joining us. Please remember to like and subscribe.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.